How can one maintain a consistent prayer schedule during Ramadan despite varying work and sleep patterns? So subhanallah, we all find it quite challenging in the month of Ramadan to initially adjust one's schedule to the Taraweeh and the recitation of the Quran and the Tahajjud program and the prayers and the like. And similarly, our sleeping may be somewhat different. And you may even find that after Ramadan now, we are trying to readjust our patterns in order to fit in with non-Ramadan life, so to speak. So in the instance of Ramadan itself, how can one maintain a consistent schedule is, I believe, by starting with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started. And this is a principle that I generally espouse throughout our practice of Islam. Ibda bima bada Allahu bih. And this principle is taken from the maxim within fiqh that is employed by Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala to determine that the tartib of wudu should be followed, and it is a condition of the wudu, an integral of the wudu, that the tartib or the sequence of washing the obligatory parts must be followed. Where does this come from? It comes from the fact that in the Quran, the sequence is mentioned specifically and therefore should be followed in that light. So, based on the same principle, in Ramadan and out of Ramadan, if ever you are wondering where should I begin, where should I focus my attention, how should I schedule extra acts of worship or even a basic minimum for myself in the form of a wird or in the form of recitation. And I find that one of the most effective practical steps that one could take is to begin with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began with. Ensure that your fara'id are in order, then maintain consistency on that and add supererogatory or nawafil according to one's ability and according to what one can be consistent with. And there's evidence for this in that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam, he taught us that Man adha li waliyan faqad adhantuhu bil harb. It's a hadith Qudsi, so he's speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who says, whoever harms a friend of mine, I declare war on that person. Then the hadith continues to say, no servant can draw close to me except with what I, Allah, had made obligatory upon that servant. And then the servant draws closer to me with nawafil or supererogatory elements, hatta ahbabtu, until I love that servant. Giving the idea that the servant is consistently practicing the fara'id as they should be practiced, avoiding haram, and then engaging in voluntary acts to the extent of their ability and consistently until they reach a stage of earning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. Allahumma ja'alna minhum, may Allah make us of those. So if you follow that principle, whether inside of Ramadan or outside of Ramadan, then you are following prophetic guidance in terms of where we are giving priority. And specifically in relation to schedule, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us a fixed schedule every single day that should enable us, it should facilitate for us to schedule other factors in to our daily practice of Islam. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta, that the prayer has been fixed at prescribed times for the believers. Now, this means that we don't have an option as to when we pray. We have to pray 5 times a day, and we have to pray according to a fixed time slot. So since this is an obligation, therefore attaching something to what we are already doing by way of pinning or fixing another practice onto it is far easier than to create a separate time slot that is not obligatory, that we are not accustomed to practicing, that is not part of our daily habits, and then trying to create new actions within that time slot. So as opposed to, for example, saying that, look, I would like to recite a juz of the Quran or half a juz of the Quran, so I'm going to fix a time during the day, and let's say it's going to be at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. For a person who did not have this schedule, they would have to create the space within their daily life at 3 p.m. and there's nothing that ties them down to that particular time automatically. So it could shift. Whereas the person who pins the extra or supererogatory acts of worship to that which is obligatory, they are already going to be praying Fajr. So if they schedule their recitation after Fajr, Then when they pray Fajr, before they rise from their place of prayer, they ensure that they fulfill the recitation that they've allotted for themselves. Or after Dhuhr or before Dhuhr, after Asr or before Asr, after Maghrib or before Maghrib, after Isha or before Isha. In this way, we have 5 fixed slots every single day that the conscientious Muslim would already be following and already be basing his or her life upon, that could easily be utilized to implement other acts of worship. The key here is in fixing it. So as much as you are not going to neglect the prayer itself, similarly you should also not stand from your place of prayer until you have fulfilled your wird or your quota of dhikr or your recitation of Quran, etc. And in this way, we can facilitate for ourselves using the system that Allah Ta'ala had already granted us to implement new habits, new acts of worship that we would like to bring into our lives. And this doesn't only have to be acts of worship, it could also be other healthy practices. For example, at one stage I was doing for every salah, after the salah, I would make a certain number of push-ups. And in this way, I could finish, quite a number of push-ups over the course of a day. And that was just something that I did at a particular time period in order to facilitate some physical exercise. And you could also do the same for reading beneficial material that perhaps isn't purely Islamic based or Islam based. So in this way, we can facilitate our own schedules utilizing the schedule that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created for us. And this would be much easier than to invent a new schedule that you have to stick to in addition to that which Allah ta'ala had obliged us with. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam.
La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.